Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that, well, it touches on education, freedom of expression, even what it means to be a well-informed citizen. Book banning.
Mm-hmm.
You might think of it as, I don't know, a relic of the past, maybe?
Yeah, something from history class.
Right. But our sources reveal a fascinating and honestly often surprising resurgence.
Indeed. We've pulled together insights from places like the Free Speech Center, the Human Rights Campaign, and PE America, really solid sources.
Big ones.
And our mission here in this deep dive is really to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge. We want to explore the nuances of why books get challenged, who is doing the challenging,
Right.
and the profound impact this has across communities. We'll also look at the legal side of things and the powerful counter-movements defending the freedom to read.
So by the end of this, you should have a pretty thorough understanding. We want to move beyond just the headlines, get to the core arguments and, the real-world implications of what it means when a book gets challenged or pulled. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is book banning?
Fundamentally, it's the most widespread form of censorship, at least in the U.S.
Right.
Our research indicates it happens when private individuals, sometimes government officials or organizations, remove books from libraries, school reading lists, even bookstore shelves.
And it's because they object to something in the book.
Exactly. The content, the ideas, the themes
Yeah.
could be anything.
Okay, so what kind of objections are we talking about? What are the common complaints?
Well, they're incredibly varied. People cite things like graphic violence, disrespect for parents or family, sexually explicit content.
Okay.
Sometimes things like exalting evil or lacking literary merit or just not being suitable for a certain age group. Offensive language is another big one. But what's really striking, and it comes up again and again in the sources, is how often the complaints specifically target books by or about LGBTQ plus people or dealing with gay issues, or even topics like slavery.
So things that might make certain individuals uncomfortable.
It seems that way. That discomfort often seems to be the driving force behind prioritizing them for removal. It's less about objective criteria sometimes and more about, well, feelings.
It's a huge range of objections, though. Everything from graphic violence to unsuitability for age groups. It makes me think about the history here. Because, obscenity used to be the main focus, right? Like with D.H. Lawrence or James Joyce.
Exactly. Lady Chatterley's lover, Ulysses. Those were the big ones, focused almost entirely on explicit sexuality or perceived obscenity.
But our sources say there was a shift, late 1970s.
Yes, a crucial shift. The focus broadened. It wasn't just about specific passages anymore. It became about the ideologies expressed in the books.
Ideologies. So moving beyond just content to the overall message.
Precisely. It's a different kind of challenge. It moved from policing, say, morality in an airy sense, to trying to shape mindsets. It suggests a deeper battle over intellectual freedom and what kids are allowed to even think about.
And that shift sort of sets the stage for what we're seeing now, this huge resurgence.
Right.
Because the scale of it is, well, it's pretty staggering. You mentioned PE and America's data.
Yes, get this. 4,349 recorded instances of book banning.
Wow.
Just from July through December of 2023. That's only 6 months.
4,349. That's a massive acceleration.
It really is. And the data also shows pretty clearly that most of these challenges today are coming from the ideological right.
Any specific groups mentioned?
Yeah, groups like Moms for Liberty come up frequently. They're particularly active, often challenging, dozens of books at once in a single district.
Multiple books at once.
Yeah.
That sounds overwhelming for schools or libraries.
It absolutely can be. And it puts librarians in a really tough position. Depending on the state rules, they might have to read and write a detailed response for every single challenged book.
Just the administrative burden alone.
Exactly. Some sources suggest librarians might remove books preemptively just to avoid that massive workload. It's almost like a denial of service attack on the library system.
Is there any hint that maybe that burden is part of the strategy to overwhelm the system?
It's a sharp question. The reports certainly imply that the sheer volume is a tactic. It overwhelms staff, forces their hand. And another tactic is pulling, isolated, maybe lurid passages completely out of context.
Ah, right. Making it sound worse than it is.
Precisely. Misrepresenting the whole book based on one paragraph makes defending the book much harder.
Okay, let's talk geography. Where is this happening most?
PNN America's reports show it surging across the U.S., but particularly around topics of sex, sexuality, and race.
Uh-huh.
And it's definitely more common in the South and the Midwest, often concentrated in, interestingly, small pockets or communities within states. Texas and Florida are frequently named as hotspots.
Yeah, those states come up a lot politically, too. You see figures like Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis with his Don't Say Gay bill.
Right, restricting teaching about sexual orientation or gender identity.
And also challenges to African American history courses, DEI initiatives.
And in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott signed a bill in 2023 specifically banning sexually explicit books in schools.
The sources also mention this term, fragilism.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Yeah, fragilism. It's described as this kind of fear of extreme sensitivity among kids, the idea that they need protection from potentially uncomfortable topics like, say, the history of slavery.
So it's about protecting kids from feeling bad, essentially, even if the topic is important.
That seems to be the core idea behind the term. It suggests a potential prioritizing of emotional comfort over exposure to, well, difficult truths. Truths that are pretty vital for developing empathy and critical thinking. It can lead to avoiding necessary conversations altogether.
And the federal response has been mixed, hasn't it?
It really has. The Biden administration initially criticized some bans, even appointed a coordinator.
Right, I remember that.
But that position was later cut, and some complaints were dismissed, called a hoax in early 2025. On the other hand, the Trump administration generally supported bans based on parents' rights, especially around sexually explicit material.
But the definition of explicit material itself can be an issue, right?
Absolutely. Opponents argue that the vagueness of that term allows for biased censorship. It can become a tool to target LGBTQ plus students or books about race, using subjectivity to mask discrimination.
Okay, so we've talked about who's challenging and where. Let's zero in on what they're targeting.
Right.
The sources point overwhelmingly to one area, children's literature.
Yes. The argument is usually about protecting children, shielding them from ideas or content seen as dangerous.
Dangerous how?
Ideas that raise questions or prompt critical thinking that maybe some parents or political or religious groups find inappropriate, or perhaps they just aren't ready to discuss them with their kids.
And what kind of content specifically gets flagged most often?
What's really fascinating, or perhaps predictable, is the laser focus on books with stories by and about people of color and LGBTQ plus individuals.
So diverse voices are the main target.
Overwhelmingly. Especially young adult novels, books featuring female protagonists, queer protagonists, non-binary protagonists. Maya Kobabe's graphic memoir, Genderqueer, is like the poster child for this. It's consistently one of the most banned books nationwide.
So this kind of censorship, it really reduces the visibility of these groups.
Absolutely. It stigmatizes their identities, their stories, their history.
And this ties into something else the sources mentioned, educational gag orders. That sounds serious.
It is. The scale is incredible. Since January 2021, 46 out of 50 state legislatures have introduced 307 of these orders.
307, wow.
Yeah, through legislation or policy. And over a third of them specifically target any discussion of sexual orientation or gender identity in K-12 schools.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Florida's HB 7, it bans teachers from discussing certain topics on race and gender that might make students feel guilt or anguish. Or Iowa's SF 496, which prohibits instruction on gender identity or sexual activity from kindergarten through 6th grade.
What's the bigger impact of these kinds of laws?
Well, if you connect the dots, these policies, even when they're framed as protecting children from indoctrination,
Right, that's the common framing.
they actually end up restricting free expression
Yeah.
and the right to receive information. The rhetoric often uses these really harmful stereotypes, like labeling LGBTQ plus people as inherently sexual or pornographic. It exploits the vagueness of terms like obscenity.
Is there a history to that tactic, using vague terms?
Definitely. Think back to the Comstock Act of 1873. It banned obscene material through the mail, but didn't define obscene. Millions of books were burned under that law. It shows how easily vague terms can be weaponized to suppress content the government dislikes.
Okay, beyond the laws and the stats, let's talk about the human impact. The sources included some really powerful quotes.
They really did. From students, educators, parents, librarians, the people directly affected.
Let's hear from the students first. There was C.J. Walden, a senior in Florida.
Who spoke about the risk of self-harm and suicide, saying laws like these are condemning the LGBTQ plus community to death. Really strong words.
Incredibly strong. And Gabrielle Izu, a Texas senior, talking about finding peace with her bisexuality.
Yeah, she said finding a book showing a queer life could be lived would have helped her so much sooner.
And Safi Cousins, just a sixth grader in Florida.
Non-binary, yeah. Said finding media showing their identity as normal was really helpful.
Then Alec Burgess, eighth grade, Colorado, saying banning a book just sends the message it's not okay to be gay.
Mm-hmm.
And Kate Johnson, Illinois Jr., pointed out how age restrictions make sexuality seem like this forbidden, adult-only thing, creating a harmful environment.
These kids get it. They see the impact directly.
Then there are the educators. Megan Mayer, a middle school teacher in Florida.
Trying to be that supportive person, letting kids know I'm going to support them and be in their corner.
Jean Nettles, another Florida teacher, worrying about her students with same-sex parents feeling like they have to hide who they are at school.
Yeah. And Austin Johnson, a sociologist, wishing he'd learned about being transgender earlier, saying it would have totally changed my life.
Clinton McCracken, an Orlando art teacher, connecting it to suicide rates among LGBTQ+ youth, calling it a created culture war.
He said he tries with all my power to teach kids to be okay with who they are. Powerful stuff.
And Mae Christensen, sociology teacher in Tennessee, with that incredibly profound line, "We should not be prioritizing one student's comfort over another student's very existence."
That one really hits hard. Comfort versus existence.
Terrence, too, fighting back. Janelle Perez in Miami, "Nobody is going to silence us."
Jen Cousins in Florida calling a book about LGBTQ+ issues suicide prevention for her non-binary child.
And Stephanie Farrell, another Florida mom, saying, "It is our job as parents to make sure these books do not disappear."
Fierce advocacy.
Right. And finally, the librarians. Shirley Robinson from the Texas Library Association.
Pointing out how politicized it's become, which is obvious but important to state.
Carrie Damon, a San Antonio librarian, just flat out saying banning is never justified.
Roosevelt Weeks in Austin emphasizing the freedom to read is a right that must be protected.
Hamy Prothero in Wichita with that great line about one family's choice not dictating another's.
Yeah, that one family may choose not to read something does not determine whether or not it's appropriate for another family. That's key.
And Davina Sothoff in Utah, talking about the library's role in helping kids see themselves and develop empathy for others.
These voices really underscore the documented harms, especially to LGBTQ+ youth mental health. The sources cite higher risks, bullying, suicide, skipping school, doing worse academically.
There were specific stats, too, right?
Pretty stark ones, like 86% of LGBTQ+ youth reporting being bullied or harassed at school, and 85% of trans or non-binary youth saying their mental health has been negatively impacted by all this legislation.
85%, that's huge.
It really drives home that this isn't just an abstract debate about books. It's about well-being, safety, belonging.
Okay, so let's shift to the legal side and the counter-movement. The First Amendment is central here, obviously.
Absolutely. Government censorship generally violates free speech.
There's always a but.
Right. Courts do allow some limits, particularly if material is deemed legally obscene or pornographic based on community standards.
But didn't you say schools can't just remove books because they dislike the ideas?
Exactly. That's the crucial point from the Supreme Court case Board of Education Island Trees Union Free School District v. Pico back in 1982. Disliking the ideas isn't enough grounds for removal from a school library.
So how does that square with the parental rights arguments we hear so much about?
That's the conflict. Opponents of bans argue that parental rights become problematic when one parent or a small group tries to dictate what all children can access. It clashes with the student's First Amendment rights to receive information and ideas.
Like in that Tinker v. Des Moines case, the armband case.
Precisely. That case recognized students have free speech rights at school, and courts are generally tougher on broad bans in public libraries, which serve adults too, than they might be on ensuring age-appropriate materials in a school library. There's a distinction there.
You also mentioned states using purportedly neutral discriminatory policies. What does that mean?
It means laws that sound neutral on the surface, but are designed or applied in a way that discriminates. Think of those vague obscenity laws that go way beyond the legal definition, or maybe overly broad curricular transparency laws.
And the effect is?
The effect is often self-censorship. Librarians and teachers get scared. They worry about facing criminal charges or losing their jobs, like that art teacher in Tennessee or the librarian in Missouri mentioned in the sources.
So they just pull books to be safe.
Sometimes, yes. And some laws are so poorly drafted they could theoretically target medical books or even dictionaries if they define sexual organs. It creates this chilling effect, deters perfectly legitimate educational material out of fear.
So it dampens speech beyond the specific books targeted.
Exactly. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, despite all these efforts, there's actually widespread opposition to book bans.
Really? What do the polls say?
The poll data is pretty clear. Like 87% of Americans oppose banning books that discuss race or slavery. 85% oppose banning for political ideas, and 76% are against banning books in public schools.
76%.
Yeah.
That includes Republicans and Democrats.
Yes, strong bipartisan opposition.
Yeah.
And the data also suggests that what most parents actually prioritize for schools, things like mental health support, addressing learning loss, doesn't really line up with these book removal campaigns.
So there's a disconnect between the activists and the broader public.
It certainly appears that way, and there's organized resistance, too.
Like the American Library Association.
Yeah, the ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom, they track censorship incidents, offer strategies, and then there's Ban Books Week every September.
Right, I've heard of that.
It's a celebration of the freedom to read, organized by the ALA and others. It really emphasizes that restricting information is more dangerous to a free society than any idea you might find in a book. It encourages people to explore challenging ideas.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does all this mean for you, the listener, trying to stay informed?
Well,
This deep dive really shows that book banning isn't simple, is it? It's dynamic, it's evolving. It has roots in older concerns about obscenity, sure, but now it extends so much further into identity, into uncomfortable truths.
and that raises a really important question, doesn't it? We've seen how vital access to diverse perspectives is for critical thinking, for understanding the world. This constant push and pull between, protecting children on one hand and preserving intellectual freedom on the other, it's ongoing. For you listening, just understanding these different viewpoints and the real-world consequences is key. These debates are happening everywhere.
Yeah. And maybe a final thought to consider. Think about how removing a book, even if someone thinks they have good intentions, how that might just create a vacuum.
A vacuum? How so?
A vacuum where important discussions should be happening, sparked by those books.
Yeah.
Especially now when information, or maybe misinformation, is everywhere online, often from sources that aren't exactly reliable or curated.
Ah, I see. So taking away the curated book leaves kids vulnerable to less reliable sources online.
Potentially. So the question maybe becomes, what responsibility do we all have to make sure those important conversations, the ones books can start, actually keep happening in a thoughtful way?